Hey everybody, welcome to More Fun Comics, where honestly, everything is just more fun. In this episode, we're going to be looking at and grading a copy of The Mighty Thor 133, a classic Stan Lee and Jack the King Kirby Marvel Comics collaboration from 1966, which is not only a great Silver Age comic, but has an abundance of interesting contextual cultural value as well. Don't they all? It's a fantastic, fun-to-read comic. You can feel the excitement of your 10-year-old self returning as you absorb every page. Hey everybody, welcome to More Fun Comics, a webcast dedicated to promoting the joys and pleasures of comic book collecting. Just call me Daring Dirk Drudgler, lifelong comic book fan, 20-year retailer, and comic collecting hobby advocate. I'm doing this show to kind of dig into a little bit into the hobby of comic collecting, but a little bit more affordably than it is normally. So you'll see what I'm talking about as we go on. I am an armchair grader, and I'd like to do grading comics, so we're going to do that with this. I'll take a look at kind of comics, and we'll kind of grade them as we go. So you'll learn something about comics, and you'll learn something about grading. So there's a standard 0 to 10 grading scale, 10 being gem mint, absolutely perfect. These higher grades often sell by multiples of the expected book value, as many collectors, speculators, and investors are fixated on getting the best graded copies. At this comic book shop, we're more interested in getting a great comic book and getting a great value. So we'll be focusing mostly on the mid-grade books between 4 and 7. Then that's probably where most of the books that are out in the wild are coming in anyways. The sweet spot is where I believe you can find the gems at the comic book shop, comic convention, or online, and still save a little cash. So let's talk about Thor 133. This is really actually a pretty fun book. It was published in October 1966, which actually was probably a couple months later after it actually came out. So there's some contextual stuff inside. So it probably maybe came out in August, I would think. That's usually seems to be comics were like 2 months behind or ahead on back in that day. I could be wrong. But in any case, overall, it's a pretty nice looking comic. So you get a decent thing. It's a classic novel. The most important thing about it is it's the first full appearance of Ego, the Living Planet. And he's familiar because he was the villain, so to speak, in Guardians of the Galaxy Part 2. So played by Kurt Russell, awesomely. And so it says, although this is not a first appearance, his first appearance was in the previous issue, which would be 132. But the great thing about this particular issue is it sort of sidesteps that issue, because even though it's not the first appearance, which was just a small appearance in the previous issue, this is the first full appearance, meaning he's involved in the entire episode or the entire comic, and he's largely involved. So it's kind of a way to sidestep around the first appearance thing. There's that happens a lot. Probably one of the more famous examples is the first appearance of Wolverine was actually like one panel at the end of one comic, technically. But of course, the next issue would be the one where he's the full appearance, and that's really the one people go for. So this is kind of in that range, and actually beyond that, it's actually just a great comic. So let's take a look at what we got here. So first off, the first thing we'll notice is kind of the cover. The colors look okay on the cover. It's still bright. It's not faded. It's not really too much apparent damage to it. One of the most obvious things that I see right off the bat is there's a little browning, so you can't really tell it until I put up a white. So you can see kind of the discoloration a little bit, and that's actually through the entire book is that browning, but that's actually allowable in the range we're looking at. So for this comic, just looking at it, there's some initial flaws, which we'll go over a little closer here. I'm kind of dropping this in between a 4 and a 6 somewhere, just kind of as an initial evaluation. And you kind of want to do that. You want to kind of get in the ballpark. And you as you do, more and more of these, and you look at these things, you get to the point where you're pretty much bopping right into it. I'm thinking I'd like this to be a 5. It'd be great if it could be better. But let's see if we can get a 5 out of it. So we'll take a little look at some of the closer aspects of it, and we see where we would maybe start questioning the our point of view. So one of the biggest things is these creases at the bottom of the book. So they go quite a ways up the book, and some of them actually break color, as you can see towards the bottom of the page. So that's a major flaw on the cover. So the other thing that is interesting is, and you'll see this is kind of a point of, you'll see there's a little chip here. And that is your immediate impulse is to take that chip and fold it over and get it into place. But with when these covers start browning a little bit more, they get a little more brittle. It's still pretty supple, but it's not too bad. But sometimes if you flip that little chip over, then it'll probably just chip right off, and then you got a chip in the book. So you're better off just kind of leaving it the way it is. It doesn't really affect anything. But if you see things like that, don't be too quick to start kind of spreading them out, unless it feels pretty supple. So the next thing, the obvious problem we're going to have with this issue is the spine. There's definitely a lot of abrasion of color, as you can see. And there's one particular large spot here. So, and it goes pretty much up and down the cover. So that's it. But there's no creasing, there's no spine rolls. So it's just kind of a beat up cover, spine. So, that is kind of a detracting point. So we get to the top, the edges look pretty clean, and there's a little creasing. I don't know if you can see it. A little creasing at the top there. Not too bad. It doesn't even break color, so it's not too bad. And then this edge looks pretty good too. There's no chipping. There's nothing there. So it's mostly the spine and that particular corner. So looking at the inside of the book, we'll see this is kind of one of the things that we're going to talk a lot about on this particular podcast, is the fact that we're kind of already looking at kind of a graded book. These are kind of the ones you sort of find in piles, and and retailers will have them separated out, and they may have a certain amount on them. But if you can get them at a reasonable price, and what we'll show you as we go through this book, they're just great to read. It's a legendary comic. It's a fantastic comic, and you can still find less than perfect copies, which are perfectly great for at least a reasonable amount of money. So let's see what a less than perfect copy that is perfectly reasonable might look like. So, and of course, it's Jack Kirby art and Stan Lee writes, and in the way those things worked is Stan kind of came up with an overview of everything, and then Kirby would write all the words. So there's a whole lot of history in that. But this is kind of a standard Stan Lee and Jack Kirby collaboration. They probably plowed it out. But one of the things we see immediately with the cover here is, get the focus better. There's a bit of water damage up here in the upper corner. So that's obvious, and you can kind of see the browning around the edges. So I'm not sure how that happened, because when we look at the cover, you don't really see. Maybe a little bit, but you don't really see much of the water coming through. So it's not really that big a deal. If it was on the cover, it'd be a much bigger deal. So that's a kind of an interesting thing. And of course, the awesomeness of having an ad that wants you to be astronaut tough. Hey, this is 1966. That would be what, in the middle of Gemini, maybe early parts of Gemini. So astronauts were a big thing. So that's clearly that you're going to see that a lot as a great way to appeal to consumers, is to reference an astronaut. So let's talk about the book for a minute. The immediate thing is it's a typical Thor book. And I'll go kind of quickly through it, but in Thor comics around this time, something powerful attacks Thor and starts beating him up, but he's Thor and I will not succumb to this. And he'll just fight it back, and the thing will go, I will throw more at you, and blah, blah, blah. And Thor will go, I'm not. You can't beat me. I am Thor, and I call the thunder. And ultimately proves himself more powerful than whatever he faces. And that just kind of goes on and on and on. It's a blast when you get one that's all full of action, and this is definitely one that's full of action. So another interesting aspect is one of a thing that Jack Kirby went to quite often, and in fact created many characters that were the humanoid robots. This was a recorder, and of course, it's sometime during the issue he's conflicted about humanity, and and he shows more human than whatever. So that's an interesting thing. I don't know if it's the first appearance of a humanoid. It's not, for sure. So there's a great opening page. This is the first page you turn to. Imagine yourself being 10 or 12 years old and seeing this. And here they are on Ego, and it's just this roiling thing of different ecosystems, but it's, all the great usage of the black and the shadowy darkness, which is kind of a Kirby characteristic, extra crazy space effects. But that's a real good opening page. It's a great thing to draw you into the issue. So, and then of course the first appearance of, I don't know if it's the first appearance, but the first appearance in this issue of the face of the planet. How do you do a living planet? Well, you got to give it a face. So, and it's essentially saying, I am the most powerful being in the world. I can do whatever I want. So Thor besmirth you. You won't be the most powerful. So, and then the planet proceeds pretty much for the rest of the issue to change itself into something that can beat Thor, which Thor constantly fights off. So you get lots of great Jack Kirby stuff. Like you get the Asgardian stuff, and then you get the crazy kind of Doctor Strange type stuff. So, and of course, we'll talk a lot about, as we go through various issues, we'll talk a lot about ads. So these are the great ones. Stamps were huge. So the ads are always sometimes more fun to look at. But here, Thor, Ego has determined that he can defeat the universe by spreading these living antibodies all over and destroy everything. And he'd take over, and these would be the antibodies. And, you will never defeat my antibodies. And the great memories for those of us who needed extra money and sold greeting cards to our neighbors. God bless you if you did it. They've got to figure out a way to defeat these antibodies, but of course, Thor being some kind of virus in Ego's system brings down the antibodies, which attack him into a great thing. And it looks like it's the end for Thor and the humanoid robot until Fatum, which is pretty much your Thor lightning bolt hit, and Thor emerges ready to fight anything else. Okay, here's a great part of the book. These were super important, and actually this is kind of why I love this book so much, and not just is it a great Thor story, but when I was a kid, and I know there are a lot of people here, and those of you who don't remember, the Saturday morning cartoons were a huge thing in the 60s and the 70s. And one of the things that was great about them is you'd sit down at 8 o'clock in the morning, And all three stations, there were three stations, ABC, NBC, CBS, had different lineups of cartoons, and you'd pick through, which ones you wanted to watch and so on and so forth. And then CBS came up with this lineup, which for a lot of kids was the ultimate. And it was really a great year for that. So these ads would appear in September and would get you excited for the upcoming year. But we see in this particular issue, they're introducing Space Ghost, which went on to become a huge cultural icon. And he was created by Alex Toth at the time, who was a great comic book artist and went on to do major work in animation. Also, Frankenstein Jr. appeared that year. The Impossibles. And then also you have Ugg and Dino Boy, although those guys didn't really last too much longer than the others did. And, of course, Superman, the first. I don't know if that was the first, but that's definitely one of the early, let's see, it would have been, I guess there's Fleischer, but I don't know if there was any Superman cartoon between Fleischer and these guys. So these definitely would have been an early appearance of animated superheroes, if not near the first, at least from the 60s on. These were a blast. These are fun to find. These are kind of fun to come across when you're just kind of looking through a book. But another thing to notice about the pages as we look through the grading is the pages there. You notice there's a little brown. Again, I'll bring out my white card, but you can see kind of where it's at. That's sort of a tan. The pages are kind of screwy in the way they grade them. There's white, which really isn't white, but it's as white as the white's going to be. And then they kind of go down to brown this would be tan. An important part about pages is, since there's so much variation, especially in the Silver Age and the Golden Age, which are printed on less sturdy paper, is almost the more important thing is the pages being supple. So without being too brittle, you don't feel like they're falling apart. So that's kind of important. So here and of course our story ends with Thor ultimately bringing on the thunder and Ego going, I can't handle this, and I'm getting out of here. I'll never come back. And then we got the great. This is where Stan's soapbox would be. It was all Marvel junkies read this page totally, and then on the right side, which they did for years and years and years, was the issues that were coming out that month, which was a great reference for you if you loved comics and you visited your local drugstore and spinner rack to buy them. But here's one of the most interesting things, I think, is an advertisement. So pet seahorses, definitely I can see, but mail order pet monkeys is something that's a little beyond my ability to understand. And I wonder if you got like a fake monkey or some kind of, I don't know. But for $18.95, theoretically, you can get a little monkey that would sit in your hand. And I can't imagine the abuse that these animals went through if this is a real thing. So I don't know, did anybody ever buy a monkey? One of the reasons I'll do this podcast is to try to get questions answered about people who actually may have participated in these particular purchases. So back in the day, you could buy a monkey. So that's a mail order. So I don't know. It's a stunner, definitely. Shows how things have changed. So, and then we'll just punch through the rest of this book real quick. Nothing much changes as far as the grade goes, but there is another interesting thing that makes this book great and they did this for many, many issues where they did stories of Asgard afterwards, for a couple pages, which were general stories. This is a great one. This guy's a barbarian prince, and he was fought, and Thor beat him, and he's near, he's like near death, and he even has to be lifted onto his horse, and he was a valiant foe, but this is his final ride. And all of a sudden they see, here comes hell. with her Valkyries at either side of her. And they've come to take him on his final voyage. And, of course, everybody has to turn away because they can't look at hell. And the Valkyries take him, and she points, "You shall go, head this way." And he's, moped over his poor old horse. They're both finished. But through the clouds, the Golden Bridge, and there's Valhalla, and it's like, we can drink, we can fight, we can do whatever we want, we can brutalize. And he's renewed, and he's there, and the horse is up, and he's up, and it's just riding to Valhalla, and then they celebrate him with it. It's a great little story. It's only, 4 pages? One, 2, 3, 4, 5 pages. And it's a fantastic story. So, in any case, that's the other thing you find about these great things. So, and then, of course, the closing book. And the back cover looks pretty good. We don't see any real problems. So, after all that, what would you give this book? So, I'm actually I was hoping to get a 5 out of it, but I'm not going to give it a 5 because the cover is too rough. So, it's definitely, I don't think it's as low as a 4. So I'm going to put it in kind of a 4.5 area, which is 4.5 is good, very good minus. 4.5 is very good plus. Look at that. So, and it's a fun to read comic, and if it's taken care of, it'll last for a long time, and it, shouldn't be too hard to find. I'm sure there's plenty of, in this condition, out there. The Overstreet price guide. The strange thing about it is it actually is priced higher than the real first appearance issue. So this one's kind of sliding in under the radar. A 4.0 in Overstreet being kind of your standard guide if everything on Earth, every comic book was measured equally. Sometimes it's really good, and there's times when it's not up to date. But usually in instances like this, it's pretty close. 4.0, they put it at $26, and 6.0, they put it at $39. At 9.0, it's almost a $200 book, $188. And actually, I'm probably guessing anything above 9.0 is getting much higher than $188. So ours being 4.5 would definitely be more in the $26 range. Taking a look at, I always look at eBay and look at some recently sold ones, and there are a couple up here. This one is a lot rougher on the spine than ours is. It's got some creasing, not quite as bad as ours, but it's kind of choppy up at the top, and you can only tell from people only put the cover in the back issues, so you can't really tell what the inside's like, assuming it's all normal. But this one's actually looks a little worse than ours, so I'd put this one more at 4.0. And it was, bid accepted, so they $40, so they accepted bid. I don't know if they paid more than $20, $25 for this. My personal opinion is they probably paid too much. Interestingly, I found one also that's a better copy than ours, so you'll notice that there's a little bit of mess. But for most, the edges are real clean. There's no creasing. The spine is clean. The colors are bright. So this one actually, and they have it listed as a 6.0, which I looked into these guys a little bit, and they seem to definitely know what they're talking about. So when that seems pretty accurate, about a 6.0, at least based on what we got. And that sold for $30 with $6 shipping, so $36, I guess, would be the grand total, which would be pretty close to what Overstreet was charging. So it seems like eBay and Overstreet are pretty much in the same ballpark with each. If you find these, if you go out at a local convention, a comic convention, definitely visit your comic conventions, because you'll find things like this. And as we talk more and more about it, you'll be able to recognize other books that are a good quality buy. If you could find one that's even in the shape that this book's in, for around $20, then you're actually doing pretty well. So especially if you can find ones that are even a little better, more in the $20 range, or anything up to $30. So You know, with any luck, you might be able to shop around or work a deal with somebody, either at your local comic book shop or online or at comic conventions, which we'll talk a lot bit more about soon later. So next week we're going to talk about another comic, or next episode we're going to talk about another comic, and it's another Thor comic, and this is kind of a partner where it's going to be more on the higher end of the scale. So like or subscribe. We appreciate any help and look forward to seeing you again.